At least 38 residents of this apartment building heard her screams and did nothing.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're looking at the most shocking crimes that fell on Friday the 13th.
I can't believe it. Everybody's in shock.
We're leaving off the murder of Tupac Shakur because while the legendary rapper died on Friday the 13th, the shooting itself took place days earlier. The Mummy Marauder Robbery. Jason isn't the only one who hides their face on Friday the 13th. While this criminal didn't harm anyone, like Mr. Voorhees, they still committed a serious felony. On September 13, 2019, a First Convenience bank in a Harris, Texas grocery store was held up.
Surveillance photos from the bank near Houston show the suspect standing at a teller window on Friday the 13th.
The culprit? Somebody hidden behind sunglasses, a wig, a baseball cap, and, most distinctly, white gauze, giving them the appearance of a mummy. Although difficult to identify, the so-called Mummy Marauder was described as a 5'11", 20-something black man who drove a Mitsubishi Montero SUV. The FBI offered a $5,000 reward for more information.
The FBI is now asking the public for any leads so they can nab the Mummy Marauder and keep him wrapped up behind bars.
FBI spokesperson Connor Hagan couldn't resist saying, quote, "We are hoping to wrap this case up quickly," end quote. Although the Mummy Marauder is seemingly still at large. Christopher Wilder's last stand. Christopher Bernard Wilder's heinous crimes weren't restricted to one date or even one location.
He clubbed her on the back of her head. Everything just went black.
Throughout 6 months in 1984, this Australian-American serial killer traveled from Florida to several other states. Along the way, he murdered at least 8 women and abducted at least 4 more, in addition to several attempted kidnappings. He was also a suspect in the unresolved Wanda Beach murders.
I have what I call a need to meet and socialize on a more wider basis than I have been doing.
Wilder's final crime would be resisting arrest during a shootout with the police on April 13, 1984. Spotted by 2 state troopers in New Hampshire, Wilder reached for a Colt Python in his car. A struggle transpired, with Wilder being fatally shot twice.
In the struggle, the weapon went off.
One of the troopers, Leo Jellison, was also hit, but made a full recovery. The Friday the 13th virus. In addition to slasher villains, the 80s saw the rise of cybercrimes. In October 1987, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem detected a computer virus that would officially be called Jerusalem.
This virus infects both .com and .exe files.
Since the virus was first activated on May 13, 1988, though, the Friday the 13th virus became a popular nickname. This was notably just one day before the anniversary of Israel's establishment.
Now this will increase and increase until eventually the program becomes too large to fit in memory and will crash when you attempt to run it.
It wouldn't be the last time a virus spread coincided with Friday the 13th. On January 13th of the following year, another virus affected hundreds of personal computers across the UK. It remains unclear if these viruses were connected and exactly who was behind them.
And there are many, many variants of Jerusalem that I'll be taking a look at in the future.
All we know is that Friday the 13th must be a busy day for tech support. Marie Ansty vanishes. On March 13, 1970, Marie Ansty disappeared in Vallejo, California, presumably being kidnapped.
He's coming towards us.
About a week later, Ansty's nude body was discovered in Lake County, hidden in a bush. A scalp wound suggested that the young woman had been beaten and drowned. Experts determined that she had been dead anywhere between 5 and 7 days. While Ansty's murder was never solved, some suspected the Zodiac killer to be the culprit.
Don't get up. I want her to tie you up.
It's also been theorized that the Zodiac was behind the Santa Rosa hitchhiker murders, although this remains unconfirmed. Likewise, it's unclear if Ansty was part of the Santa Rosa murders, but she's been listed as a possible victim.
It's okay. This is all gonna be okay.
Whoever was behind this crime, the authorities are still searching for a sign. Mickey Spillane Gunned Down. Throughout the 60s and 70s, Irish-American mobster Mickey Spillane ran the rackets in Hell's Kitchen. Unlike some other organized crime figures, Spillane gained a reputation as the last gentleman gangster.
He may not have been as brutal or as ferocious as some of the gangsters that preceded him or those that came after him, but he was certainly no saint.
That said, Spillane's gentlemanly reputation didn't spare him from a violent fate. Even as the Italian mob clashed with the Irish mob, Spillane maintained control over his territory. His luck ran out on May 13, 1977, when Spillane was shot multiple times outside his Queens apartment.
My brother and I were watching TV with him, and he had said that a friend was stopping by.
Mickey Featherstone, a Westies gang member, was arrested for Spillane's murder, but he was ultimately acquitted. Westies founder James Coonan was also accused of orchestrating the murder, with assistance from Roy DeMeo. Spillane notably kidnapped and beat Coonan's father years earlier. In any case, Coonan took over Spillane's territory.
Trial proof showed that the Westies were a violent, organized crime group that terrorized and exploited the Hell's Kitchen section of Manhattan for the last 20 years.
The killing of Betty Gore. Being the subject of 2 recent miniseries, Candy Montgomery has re-entered the zeitgeist along with Betty Gore.
Candy, sorry, why call when you could barge right in, right?
A wife and mother, Montgomery engaged in an affair with Gore's husband, Alan. On June 13, 1980, Alan struggled to contact his wife while out of town. Neighbors discovered Betty's body with her young daughter crying in another room. Gore's death was traced to Montgomery, who claimed she was acting in self-defense after being confronted about the affair.
You would never suspicion that she was nervous in any sort of way.
According to Montgomery, Gore came at her with an axe. Montgomery then supposedly turned the axe against Gore. Although Montgomery was found not guilty, many remain skeptical, especially considering how many times Gore was struck.
Hitting her with an axe 41 times.
A crime definitely occurred that fateful Friday, but the public still debates who instigated it. The disappearance of Britney Kilgore. Britney Kilgore was last seen alive wearing a purple evening gown on April 13, 2012.
In April 2012 to go out with former Marine Staff Sergeant Louis Perez in exchange for helping her move, prosecutors said.
Days after filing for divorce, Kilgore met Louis Ray Perez. Kilgore wasn't interested when Perez invited her on a dinner cruise, but she agreed after he offered to help her move. Instead, Perez allegedly took Kilgore back to his place, where Grace Marie Maraglino and Jessica Lynn Lopez joined them.
Evidence shows that he bragged to hold a sadomasochism session that weekend.
4 days later, Kilgore's body was found. Over the following weeks, Perez, Maraglino, and Lopez were arrested. An investigation uncovered evidence suggesting that the trio was into S&M that crossed the line. It was argued that they murdered Kilgore after she refused to participate.
It took just 3 days to convict Perez, Maraglino, and Lopez of first-degree murder.
Although they pleaded not guilty, the 3 were all sentenced to life without parole. The murder of Kitty Genovese. Arriving home from work during the early morning hours of March 13, 1964, bartender Catherine Kitty Genovese walked behind an alley, where she was confronted by Winston Mosley, who followed her there.
It happened here. Kitty Genovese was almost home when she heard a man's footsteps behind her.
As Genovese attempted to run away, Mosley repeatedly stabbed her. Hearing Genovese's cry for help, a neighbor yelled at Mosley, prompting him to flee. Mosley returned shortly after, proceeding to stab Genovese, in addition to sexually assaulting and robbing her. Genovese died before she arrived at the hospital. Mosley later died in prison. A New York Times article claimed 38 people witnessed the crime without intervening, although that was proven inaccurate.
With certainly dozens of ear witnesses and eyewitnesses, but when you talk about the people who both heard something or saw something and knew what it meant, knew what was going on, I don't think it's more than half a dozen.
While a couple of witnesses did call the police, Genovese's murder provided the basis for the bystander effect and helped create 911.
The phrase that came out of this was, I didn't want to get involved.
The real Friday the 13th killer. Jason Voorhees may be synonymous with this infamous day, but David McGreevy has been called the real Friday the 13th killer, as well as the Monster of Worcester.
You know, I just couldn't believe what they were telling me.
Even Jason had limits, namely when it came to children. This wasn't the case with McGreevy, who was living with the Ralph family. Since both parents worked, they trusted McGreevy to babysit.
In the meantime, the Ralph's children were being looked after by David McGreevy, a trusted pair of hands.
Although McGreevy was said to have loved kids, he was also a drinker prone to violence. When a triple homicide occurred on April 13, 1973, the evidence pointed to McGreevy, who initially denied involvement before confessing. The Ralphs' marriage fell apart, while McGreevy received multiple life sentences.
What was McGreevy's demeanor in court?
He looked very down, and I think he was obviously resigned to his fate.
He was paroled in December 2018 after nearly 4 decades in prison, currently living as a free man. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into Settings and switch on your notifications. The Paris attacks. The European Union faced its deadliest attack in over a decade in November 2015. The attack commenced on Friday the 13th when 3 separate explosions transpired outside of and near the Stade de France stadium. 1 person died along with the bombers, who failed to enter the stadium where President of France François Hollande was attending a game.
So I say firmly that France will remain a country of freedom.
The terror didn't end there, however. Multiple shootings and another bombing ensued across Paris as the night progressed. The most casualties occurred at the Bataclan Theater, where over 1,000 people attended an Eagles of Death metal concert.
At that time, Jesse ran towards me, and we went in the corner of the stage.
Islamic terrorists carried out these attacks, which ultimately claimed more than 100 lives. The attacks ended around 12:20 a.m., but Paris remains shaken. Do you have a shocking Friday the 13th story? Let us know in the comments.